Well, I'm going to actually thank Kathy for organizing today's seminar and discussion with the team. And I really appreciate her efforts in providing this very first mentorship lectureship about giving a VTEU overview with Dr. Emilia Belding and Dr. David Stevens. So I think without further ado, we should probably get started and let them take it away so that we can all get some more insight into how the VTEUs work.
Sure. So maybe one question I have, and David's about to join. Emily's prepared with a few slides with the overall introduction, and David's going to talk about some more specific aspects of the leadership group from the leadership group side and how as trainees you might get involved. And so Kathy, you also wanted us to at some point to give just a little bit of background on ourselves and sort of how we got where we are. Would it be better, or Kathy or whoever, Laura, whoever wants to answer this question, would it be better to start with that while we're waiting for David?
I think it's a great introduction.
Okay.
Give, 3 or 4 minutes about each one of you and what you do and how you got where you are, because I think you all have very great and very interesting stories that the trainees are going to learn from, and me too.
Okay, sounds good. Then I'm going to let Emily go first.
So thank you. So I'm Emilia Belding, and I am the director of the Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases. That's an extramural division at NIAID, which is one of the institutes at NIH. I am a physician by training, so I went to medical school, and then I did a residency in internal medicine. Then I did a fellowship in infectious diseases at Hopkins, and I stayed at Hopkins for another 14 years or so as faculty. I don't think I have claim to call myself a vaccinologist, even though I would say what I've done since I've been in my current position, what I've focused on by necessity, particularly in the past year, is a whole lot of vaccine science, many layers of it, particularly in development and discovery. So following my tour of duty at Hopkins as faculty, which I primarily focused on HIV, clinical care, HIV prevention research, sexually transmitted infections. I was an infectious disease consultant the way everyone in the division was that was clinically trained. I took a job at NIH as deputy director in the division of AIDS. That's one of our sister divisions at NIAID. And there I learned how NIH works. And I tried to acquire management skills in science to move in, and then I was chosen for the position that I have when there was a retirement at NIAID. And so now I'm division director of another infectious disease focused division. We have a whole lot of pathogens, not just one, which was our focus in the division of AIDS. Now we have everything else. And vaccines are a lot of what we do. We fund the clinical trials network that is called the IDCRC, which you'll be hearing more about and learning more about, and the VTEUs, which are trials units that are affiliated with that network. So that is me. I've been in my job for over 4 years now, and I will just say in 2020, I was totally consumed with SARS-CoV-2 as what I thought about almost 99.9% of my professional time.
Probably a lot of your non-professional time too, whatever that is these days, right? I'm not sure we have any true non-professional time. So David, maybe you could introduce yourself next, a little bit about your background and your journey of how you got to where you are.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathy. I appreciate this meeting, and I appreciate the organizers and also the mentees, and I want to congratulate the mentees. This is an exciting part, in my view, of our program, and I'm really excited about these sessions, and I want to welcome you to the IDCRC. As Emily said, these are challenging times. In some ways, it's the tale of two cities. Maybe it's the worst of times and the best of times. The worst of times, obviously, with the pandemic, but the best of times in terms of some of the science and some of the issues that we're confronting with this pandemic, and and the platforms that have been developed for us to approach COVID-19. And we're learning a lot about this virus, but also learning a lot about pandemics. But so yeah, it's a challenging time, and really for you, it's for all of us really, it is the pandemic of our careers. Background, I'm probably the youngest. No, I'm not the youngest of the group. I'm probably the oldest of the group here. I did most of my training at Vanderbilt. Kathy and I share that role. I think Kathy Edwards, I believe, is also on the phone. Kathy and I did some initial work when I was a fellow at Vanderbilt in infectious diseases. I had done some work previous with that at the NIH Clinical Center and at Walter Reed, and so I had an interest in infectious diseases. But I had an interlude between my my internship and my residency, where I was a general medical officer in Alaska for 2 years. So I was, if you saw Northern Exposure, you basically saw what I did. I spent 2 years in an isolated military facility called Delta Junction, which is actually where we house our ICBMs to protect that part of the globe from our interceptors are there. And so I was the chief medical officer. There were 2 of us. And so we alternated every other night call for 2 years in a very interesting part of the world. If you've never been, I would encourage you to be there. But certainly I had some interest, a lot of interest in oncology before I went up there. But it was really up there where I, saw the practical issues of infectious diseases and became quite interested in and went on to do my fellowship at Vanderbilt. I came to Emory in 1982, so I've been at Emory for, almost 40 years, and another year or so, so a long time. From my perspective, I came at the time that AIDS was just starting. My first HIV patient was as an attending at the VA in December of 1982. During my fellowship, I had seen toxic shock syndrome as a issue. Subsequently, we've been through a number of outbreaks. Hantavirus in the early 90s. I was pretty involved with CDC, and one of the reasons I was in Atlanta actually is Bill Schaffner. Some of you know Bill from Vanderbilt, who's been a long-term mentor for me, and was instrumental in thinking about Atlanta and Emory and CDC. And so I've done a lot with CDC. I was involved with the clinical team for anthrax, was involved with SARS-1, actually because of Jeff Copeland, got to travel to Hong Kong and was involved in some of the response to SARS-1, in almost 20 years ago now. And then certainly we've had our experiences at Emory with Ebola and more recently with Zika, and now, as Emily said, we've spent nothing but the last year really dealing with SARS-CoV-2. So that's my background. I've been chief of infectious disease, or director of the Division of Infectious Diseases here for a number of years prior to my becoming chair of the Department of Medicine in 2013, and also have been serving as the vice president for research at Emory in the Woodruff Health Sciences Center. So that's an overview. I see some of my colleagues. I see Xanthia on the call. Hi, Xanthia. And so that's a bit of background.
Okay, so I suppose I'll go next, and then we'll jump into the rest of the presentation, but we're going to have a lot of time for questions. So I'm Kathy Newzel, and with David Stevens, I'm a co-PI of the IDCRC VTEU mechanism that's again been for about 1 year now, and it's pretty much been SARS-CoV-2. I'm currently here in Baltimore at the University of Maryland, and I started at the University of Maryland College Park as an undergrad, went to Hopkins for medical school, and then down to Vanderbilt. So you're seeing some common threads here perhaps in the infectious disease and vaccinology world. I went to Vanderbilt with my husband, who was training in surgery and a surgical subspecialty. So I was at Vanderbilt for 11 years while he was still a surgical resident and a fellowship, but really set me on my career path and had wonderful mentors, and you're going to know all of them and all their names. So I did internal medicine residency there, infectious disease fellowship. I did a master's of public health, and in that 11 years, I also had time to be faculty for a few years while I waited for my husband to finish his training. You know, Vanderbilt, I loved Vanderbilt in the vaccinology and the infectious disease training because we really worked very closely together with the adult group and the pediatric group. In fact, I would say we really worked as a unit, and there aren't that many places where you have that, although here at the University of Maryland, we try to do that. And you know, if you meet people outside the IDCRC and internationally, many of them actually think I'm a pediatrician. And Kathy Edwards, I hope you and others at times have certainly considered me an honorary pediatrician, because you learn very fast. If you really want to affect diseases, infectious diseases in populations, you need to focus on children. You need to focus on our childhood vaccination programs, which are so enormously successful. So working with Kathy Edwards and Barney Graham and Bill Gruber and Mark Dennison and many, many other names that you're hearing now as leaders of this COVID-19 response, again, I really could not have had better fellowship training. I then went to the University of Washington in Seattle as faculty, and really at the University of Washington, and perhaps similar to David and Emily, this is how certainly for someone of my generation, HIV really affected your training. You know, HIV was being discovered when I was a medical student, certainly a huge part of my fellowship training. And back then, you almost had two paths. You know, you went into AIDS research or you did non-HIV. And certainly at the University of Washington, there was a lot of HIV, but my path had really been solidified at Vanderbilt as a population, I would say, vaccinologist. And so, you know, I really started out and built my own research program there, mainly in influenza, but in other pathogens, and then had an opportunity that was a bit different, and that I never would have expected, that actually came through Barney Graham and a mutual friend, to move to PATH, which is a global health not-for-profit, and lead large vaccine introduction and research programs there in the international setting. And so I spent 10 years at PATH. I maintained my faculty position at the University of Washington and traveled all over the world. I last traveled to Africa 1 year ago this month to go to Malawi before everything was disrupted. And before then, you know, for the last 15 years, I've been traveling overseas at least once a month, sometimes more than once a month, doing very large, again, population-based vaccine programs. So 5 years ago, I had an opportunity that I thought was fantastic to come and be only the second leader of the Center for Vaccine Development, led by the very famous, pioneering, and just brilliant Mike Levine, who was stepping down after 40 years. And really it was mentoring and getting back to academics full time, working with bright young people. And again, that medicine and pediatrics working together for population benefit that really attracted me to this position. And so here I am. I do still run some large international programs, even though I've been grounded for a year now. And it's really been wonderful to be part of this IDCRC effort. And it's really Emily's brainchild. And that's why we're going to turn to Emily and let her start and give us a bit of an introduction.
Okay, can you still hear me?
Yes,
okay,
and we can
so I was saying where the Infectious Disease Clinical Research Consortium is funded out of the Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, and that is an extramural division of NIAID. So this is the org chart for NIAID, and you can see we, as Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases with me here down on the right, are one of 3 extramural research divisions. The other is Division of Allergy, Immunology, and Transplantation, and Division of Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome, DAIDS. The 3 extramural divisions are also, there's also intramural divisions, which include Division of Clinical Research, the Vaccine Research Center, and the Division of Intramural Research. And then the Division of Extramural Activities, they're the ones that sort of set policy or implement policy for NIH and grants and contracts. And they're the ones that might be your grants management specialist if you happen to get an award. They also, sort of set the standards for like institutional training grants, for example. Some of you might come from institutions that have those for infectious disease or for something else specific. So this is our institute, and of course, Tony Fauci is our institute director. Everybody knows that. Here is the organizational chart for our division. We have a number of offices, and the VTEU grants and the IDCRC grants sit in the Office of Clinical Research Resources. So there's program staff there that manage the grants and talk to people on the ground or at the front lines almost on a daily basis. So that's an important box, the blue box there. But then the other important boxes are the yellow boxes at the bottom. These are all our scientific branches where there's branch chiefs, clinical staff that interact in clinical trials and have important roles in clinical trials, and also people with experts in laboratory assays, and then just program officers that manage other grants that might someday be related to something that the IDCRC would like to do. So I don't have the names of the branch chiefs here because this would just be too cluttered, but depending upon your area of interest, you might have an opportunity to interact with one of the branch chiefs sometime soon. So at DMID, unlike the Division of AIDS, we have all of the pathogens that aren't named HIV. So they're in this word salad slide here. We do have priorities, but things that the IDCRC could do could be related to any of our pathogens, but the priorities tend to be the ones that are big killers or have potential to be the big killers. So tuberculosis, influenza, particularly with a focus on developing a universal influenza vaccine, malaria, approaches or vaccines or other therapeutics that might target antimicrobial resistance. And then there's that last bucket, which is everything else that could be a giant threat. And those might be pathogens that are intentionally released. That was, a big worry a couple decades ago with anthrax, et cetera. But then much more recently, emerging infectious diseases. And these include things like Zika, which emerged about 3 or 4 years ago as a threat. But then, of course, in this bucket also is the SARS coronavirus too. So what did we ask the grant applicants to respond to when we issued the RFA that led to the funding of the IDCRC? Well, really, the capabilities that we were looking for would be sites that could recruit and retain normal healthy volunteers, including throughout the lifespan. So infancy all the way to the end of, to elderly would be important groups to be able to recruit into clinical trials, particularly testing vaccines, but not exclusively. Global reach is what we like this network to have, because there are so many infectious diseases that where in order to study them, you do have to recruit an international population. And we need places that have the capability to conduct studies according to a high regulatory standard. Many of our trials are under IND, so not just not necessarily implementation research. That's not the priority. That's not the focus. Other important considerations, of course, everybody wants money and resources to be used efficiently. And then this term, a nimble response to an outbreak of an emerging pathogen, we sort of previously had VTEU contracts be the mechanism, and those were cumbersome in my view. I think with the grant mechanisms, we were able to respond much more nimbly when SARS coronavirus first came about. We just had to say, give us a protocol and tell us how much it costs, and we'll supplement you to get going, when we needed to do the phase 1 study of the messenger RNA vaccine that was designed by Moderna. And along the way, this past year, I think it was good. This allowed this group of clinical trial units that has vast expertise in conducting vaccine trials to become part of a larger entity that we term the CoVPN, the Coronavirus Prevention Network, with other NIAID funded networks, which were funded through the grants mechanism. And I don't think they could have come together in the same productive way if we had asked them to bid on a contract for every particular protocol. Those protocols just need to launch and they needed to go, and they were able to do that. So, so far, I'd say so far so good, although there have been enormous challenges. These are the sites, not geographically dispersed perfectly, but it's a pretty wide range, and there's a lot of international sites that have not been, that are not shown here, that international sites that have relationships with the VTEUs that are funded as prime. So I guess that's my introductory set of remarks, and I'm happy to take questions if that's on the agenda for now.
Yeah, I think we could probably go to you, David, because I think your presentation is complimentary, and then we can take some questions.
All right. Okay, well, let me just go ahead and then you can, we'll go from there. Again, thank you for coming. And I, again, want to welcome the mentees to the Infectious Disease Research Consortium. The IDCRC, as you've heard from Emily, was established in December of 2019. It seems like it was a decade ago, Emily. For all of us, I think a lot has happened. I have a picture of our first meeting in January of last year. We're coming up on our annual meeting again. And a lot has happened, and we were not practicing social distancing a year ago. We were not using masks a year ago. Things have dramatically changed. The IDCRC is, as was mentioned, a grant and links the longstanding VTEUs together with a leadership group composed of an operations center, leadership operations center, a clinical operations unit, a unit we call the SDSU, Statistical and Data Science Unit, and a laboratory operations unit. These 4 components compose the leadership group, work very closely with the VTEUs, also work closely with protocol-specific sites. We have, for example, one protocol-specific site very active as a part of our COVID response at the University of Alabama, largely doing the ACT trials, therapeutic ACT trials that have been very important for the IDCRC, for DMID. Work closely, obviously, with NIAID, DMID, and NIAID support structure in this model. And there are international sites, although we won't go into those at this section. All right. As Kathy mentioned, Kathy and I serve as the PIs for the IDCRC. We are about both operations, clinical operations, clinical trials, clinical research, in addition to promoting the science of infectious diseases outside of HIV. And these are so-called expert working groups that have been assembled to prioritize candidates, diagnostics and therapeutics, and also other interventions, and to potentially test those in clinical trials. A sweet spot of the VTEUs historically has been phase 1 studies, phase 1 initial in-human studies, and that remains, in my view, a really important critical part of the of our goal and our mission. In addition, we have, as was mentioned, become affiliated with other networks, the HVTN, the HPTN, in terms of the COVID prevention network, performing large-scale phase 3 vaccine trials. So this is the leadership group. Obviously, some are on this call, Kathy and Kathy Edwards and Kathy Newzel, for example. A diverse group of leaders in vaccines, leaders in infectious diseases. We are supported by a group called FHI 360, which has provided support for a variety of clinical research groups over the years, including the HPTN and the STI CTG network. This are the VTEU leaders that many of you know well, that we work very closely with. There's a considerable amount of overlap between the leadership group and the VTEUs. That's probably anticipated, given the backgrounds that many of us have had in both vaccines and infectious diseases. Again, our goal is to conduct, the VTEUs are the main instruments for conducting these trials, and really have been the resources for NIAID's response to public health emergencies for many years. As I think you can see on the next slide, they were established in 1962, and again, I won't go through all of this, but they played key roles in response to a variety of emerging infections, avian influenza, Zika, now COVID, for many, many years, and really contributing to basic vaccine science, immunology, genomics, transcriptomics, and human infection control models. This is an expanded map, if you will, of our 2020 IDCRC sites. Not only are we interacting with the VTEUs, we're also focused upon sites where our leadership group is based outside of the VTEUs. We're also dealing with VTEU subsites of the VTEUs for performance largely of the phase 3 trials. And as I mentioned, we've had a couple of protocol-specific sites, one dealing with immune assays at the University of North Carolina, the second dealing, as I mentioned, at UAB. So one thing I want to emphasize is just briefly in this presentation are the concepts. We have established a pathway, a portal, if you will, and I would encourage all of you to go to the idcrc.org website and review the process for concept and concept submission. It begins really with a one-page concept, and that is reviewed by the expert working group. So we again encourage you to understand the process and to then think about submitting concepts for ultimately protocol development, protocol implementation. And the results that we're looking at are obviously scientific and impactful scientific publications, and contributing to things like the UAs and BLAs for vaccine or drug approval. And we've had remarkable success, in my view, this year in helping to move the COVID-19 therapeutics and vaccine fields forward. This document that actually Kathy Newzel helped put together and populate is on our website. It just illustrates the pathway. Concept generation can come from a variety of individuals or groups, and these come to our portal. It's an electronic submission and is then reviewed by our expert working group, who may decide, based upon the concept, to ask for what's called an extended concept, in order to more extensively review. Those extended concepts are again reviewed, judged for scientific merit based upon a scoring system that not only includes scientific merit, but also public health impact, feasibility, fit with the VTEU mission, innovation, and then it's given an overall priority score. And then it moves to a governance committee that I mentioned earlier called the EMT for prioritization and moving ultimately into protocol development and eventually protocol implementation. But I think this is important for you to understand this pathway and how to become engaged and a part of this pathway. We've had 75 concepts, ICPs that were submitted in 2020. Most of those were in the coronavirus arena, 61 in that particular arena. We're starting to see concepts now come in from other components of our other activities outside of coronavirus, but by and far, in a way, coronavirus dominated our initial year. Ultimately, 15 of those were approved. Some were withdrawn, some went to different pathways, some received other means of support, but this just gives you a sense of concepts and the concept pathway. And then we've moved 16 to extended concepts that were processed, and 7 of which are now moving forward into protocol development. We can talk more in a few minutes about that particular process if you like. In addition to we call building the plane over the last year, we had to fly the plane and build it. Sometimes the plane felt like it was coming apart, but we've persevered. And a lot of people have contributed many hours to helping to launch this IDCRC infrastructure, which includes not only some of the things that I've already talked to you about, but also the key function committees, of which the mentee, mentorship, career development, training and development group is one of those committees that Kathy Edwards and Ego Fotokum are helping to direct. And we can talk more about some of those key function committees later if you'd like. But we also have appointed recently an external advisory committee to help us navigate the IDCRC, finished our first year, and also are continuing to put in place operating procedures, which require a fair amount of time and effort to get these operating procedures correct. So it's not only there's a lot of infrastructure that goes with creation of this network. So again, I just want to thank you for participating in this program and congratulate you. I want to again congratulate this key function committee. This was, I believe, when Emily was helping to design this program, she had the idea of mentorship and menteeship as a principal focus of what the IDCRC should do. And so we're really excited about this, including our pilot awards, our new investigator pilot awards, which is the 14 we received, and we have a February 1 deadline for the application. So I'm going to stop there. And stop sharing my screen and go back to Kathy. I believe you're the
Okay, well, thank you both, and really the beginning of this IDCRC, you know, coincided, I guess we had about a month, and David and I and everybody else had about a month to just figure out what we were going to do. We went to NIH, we met with Emily and her team, and then it was basically all COVID all the time. And I do want to acknowledge, and I think it's important to acknowledge, so I hope some of your questions will be about this, that I really feel, I also lead our T32 fellowship program here in vaccinology, and Emory has one as well. And I know many of the other groups involved with the VTEUs have T32 training programs in infectious diseases and other related aspects. But I really do worry about the impact of this pandemic on trainees and early faculty. And not only your careers and your research, which have been interrupted, you know, those of us that are older are really, you know, in this for the goal and in this for the pandemic, as I know everybody is, but the disruption to your training, you know, is real. And I think we need to acknowledge that. And we need to try to think of ways that we can be helpful. You know, for example, I think this COVID pandemic is going to be the genesis of many, many fascinating and interesting new avenues of research. So the extent that we as leaders, you know, can help get you access to specimens to ask those new questions, you know, I think we should. I would also say that we recognize many of you are also young parents, and as hard as it was for me to be in your position and be a young parent, I can't even imagine doing that right now. You know, when you're trying to be a teacher to young children and a daycare provider. And so we recognize how incredibly difficult this has been and disruptive to your careers. So, so perhaps we can open it up to questions, or I don't know if Kathy or Ego or Laura or who else did I see on, Sharon or others have comments before we do.
First of all, I just want to thank Emily and David and Kathy for agreeing to have this conversation, for providing insight so that hopefully, you know, we all have a better understanding of the history and the arc of where we are with the VTEU and the IDCRC. I actually am really interested in hearing what questions our mentees have. And also maybe some question I have is, how would you suggest that mentees engage with the leadership of the IDCRC, aside from the work that they're already doing, putting together proposals for grant funding and the like?
David, I don't know if it looks like you're about to talk.
Yeah, I was going to just make a comment that certainly participation, and we can certainly make that open. There is a weekly or biweekly VTEU call. It seemed that at least listening to some of the conversations that go on in that call is one way of learning about the IDCRC and the VTEU structure. We have an annual meeting coming up in next week. I think allowing you to participate in that meeting would be another approach to learn more about the IDCRC and the VTEU structure. Those are just a couple of comments.
And I know a few of you are participating on expert working groups. If you'd like to comment on how you feel that experience has gone, and maybe others would be interested, you know, we're going to be doing this on a rotating basis. I will say too, you know, I'm a little bit biased because Megan Deming is from here at the University of Maryland, but on these expert working groups, you know, the idea was that the mentee would benefit from being part of that. I mean, you know, Megan trained with Ralph Farrick at UNC, and we have really benefited from Megan being on the coronavirus expert working group. So Megan, I don't know if you want to make a few comments on how you see that, if it's been a heavy workload, if it's been doable, anything about your experience, because that's another, you know, very practical way that we can get mentees and early career faculty involved.
Yeah, I joined the coronavirus expert working group back in late May, I think it was. And it's been about every other week. We have a 1-hour meeting. There are usually just the initial concept proposals we go through. They're from a variety of different groups, a variety of different options. Most of them are vaccine related, but some of them looking at immune responses, looking at the impact of vaccinations, looking at different age groups and different populations. It's just been a neat way to look at the different types of proposals coming in. And then a subset have progressed to these extended concept proposals where you get to see them really put forward all of the different thought they've put for these proposals and see how they've developed these concepts. And it's interesting to hear from some of the more senior individuals on these groups, on this expert working group, about how they're thinking about these proposals. Because I'm coming from a more standard, my background on coronaviruses was all lab-based. So I had a lab-based background to this, but listening to how they think about developing these proposals and what sort of things from a clinical standpoint was also really useful. So we've gone ahead and we've actually put together one of our own proposals that we are waiting to hear back from. It's going to a different working group. But having heard one expert working group think about how they look at these proposals was really helpful for creating our own. So it's been really interesting. And it's not that, I mean, for a few weeks, maybe a month or two, we were meeting weekly, but it's backed off now, thankfully. So it's a little bit less insane. So it's good.
I might just jump in and say, in addition to those activities, you might consider, now this requires a period of time to be productive, but fellows in our other network, the ARLG, which some of you might have heard about, the Antimicrobial Resistance Leadership Group, when they are allowed to have face-on meetings, which were IDSA, there was an event attached to IDSA where the fellows presented their research projects. Sometimes it was sort of a, you know, everything was still in progress or future goals. You know, it was sort of like a lab meeting, but that was a good thing to do for the fellows. And I will say that in that particular leadership group, they had a lot of fellows that went on to get K awards, were very successful in using the data that they generated through their fellowship, funded through affiliation with the ARLG. They were successful in getting K awards and junior faculty positions.
Thank you. That's a good idea. And certainly Ego and I are always trying to find ways to, so we'll reach out to you about more details, but that's certainly a good idea. Thank you, Emily.
My name is Xanthia Wiley, and I'm one of the mentees, and I'm early ID faculty. So thank you very much for this presentation. It was really helpful because I honestly had no idea what IDRC was, and now I know. I would love to call in on some of these the weekly IDCRC calls. How can we get access to the Zoom invites, and are they weekly?
They're every other week. They're every other week.
Okay.
Well, we can put the mentees. I think there's that. I don't believe there'll be an issue with that. We can certainly put the mentees on our invite list for those calls.
Thank you.
So I guess Emily raises a really good point about career development and what are your next steps. And she mentioned K awards, which I think are an important step as a junior faculty slash a first award in the process. I hope everyone's thinking about K awards in individual K awards as opposed to necessarily training grant awards, which are great, but I think, you know, it's training grant to K awards. So are there questions around the K award process? We have at Emory, for example, ICO can comment on our process for trying to prepare researchers with a Master of Science in Clinical Research as a degree program. And I think most institutions have that kind of training as well. But I would encourage you to be credentialed, if you will, in clinical research, and that's a way of approaching it.
Yeah, thank you, David, for raising that. And I think one other thing we hope to do also with the pilot award is to use it as a mechanism for mentoring and some of the mentees, trainees in this group to actually generate the necessary preliminary data, as well as just the process of putting that application together to begin to think about their K award. And so even if we know that the number of slots is limited to 2, but even the process of putting that application together itself is a training, even if you're not successful. And we've had experience here at Emory when people apply to, for example, our KL2 program, and they have great application, they were not successful, but they take that same application and put it together for an NIHK award, and they go ahead to be successful. So we really want to encourage as many of you as possible to participate in the process. You're going to get feedback regardless of what the outcome is for you, and I think those type of feedback are very good at this stage of your career.
Okay, anything else? I would also like to offer, I know anytime I've ever, interviewed for a job or interviewed somebody else for a job or attended a meeting, it's always about, sometime later in the evening when my mind clears that I think, I should have asked this question, or I should have. So, Kathy, for you and Laura and Ego, certainly if people follow up with questions, they can get those to us. This isn't a one-time engagement. I try to be on these calls as much as I can. Again, we've got some COVID pulling us away, but this isn't a one-time. We hope now that you know Emily and David and I, that you'll feel free to reach out either directly or through others on this call. And
the other thing I'd like to thank you, Kathy. I think that's really generous offer, and I know that it's sincere. I also know that Kayla has put together a survey to look at the mentees' understanding responses related to this seminar, and we really look forward to having excellent feedback. There's questions on there asking what things we didn't talk about that we really think that we could talk about, so that we can continually improve and revise things as we move forward. And Kathy, certainly if we have questions that come up that we need to feed forward, we will work on doing that to make sure that we can answer people's needs and desires, so that people can get as much as they can out of this whole opportunity.
Okay.
Kathy, one other experience that I would strongly recommend the mentees take advantage of. It's obviously virtual now, but both the ACIP, which is the CDC meeting that reviews vaccines for public use, and the VRBPAC meeting, the FDA meeting, which has gotten obviously a lot of publicity recently. Those are outstanding meetings for you to learn about, and there's great science that's presented at those meetings. But you will get a feel for the process, the FDA process of initial approval, followed by the ACIP process of implementation into public health. So both of those meetings, I would encourage you to put on kind of your calendars for thinking about participating in as a just our tuning into, if you will, because both Kathy and and we've been on those committees in the past, and I think they're essential parts of how the process really works from not just a clinical study, but what happens to that clinical study in terms of its approval as a product, and then its implementation into the public health space. Kathy, I know you've also been very involved with those committees.
Yeah, I endorse that. I think it's a wonderful learning experience and really, you know, unprecedented, historic. We've overused these sort of adjectives, but it's absolutely true. These are just wonderful learning opportunities. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.